Most people think they're too clever to fall for propaganda, and that's exactly why it works. Hi, my name is Diana, and today we are talking about informational warfare. For Ukrainians, propaganda isn't a theory or a chapter in a textbook. It's something that shapes how the world sees our war, our country, and sometimes even whether people believe the war is real. But the truth is, even if your country isn't bombed daily, that doesn't mean you're not a target. Modern warfare isn't only about artillery on the ground and missiles in the sky, but also about psychological operations, and that reaches way farther than most people realize. Most people, when they hear the word propaganda, imagine something very specific like Soviet posters, crude lies on national TV, and obvious manipulation. It only works on gullible people, right? Well, that assumption is exactly what makes informational warfare so effective. Good propaganda doesn't feel like manipulation, it doesn't try to convince you, it tries to shape the environment you think inside of. It spreads through a mix of real people, bots, and influencers online, packaged as memes, deepfakes, and ultra personalized content engineered to hit you emotionally before you can even think. Before we go any further, let's quickly clarify a few terms. Misinformation is false information that spreads without intent. Someone shares something wrong because they believe it's true. Disinformation is false information, spread deliberately to mislead or confuse. But propaganda is broader than both. It's not necessarily about spreading lies, it's about shaping perception. It can use true facts, half-truth, emotional framing, or even silence. What matters is the direction it pushes you in. Informational warfare is psychological. At its core, it works through four simple principles. Rely on emotions, never argue. It tries to trigger feelings, fear, anger, humiliation, moral outrage. Strong emotions shut down analytical thinking. Frame everything as us versus an enemy. Once a narrative becomes tribal, nuance disappears and disagreement starts to feel like a betrayal. Target groups, not just individuals, because once an idea becomes social, it becomes sticky. And hide the propagandist as much as possible. The most effective propaganda doesn't look like propaganda, it's just something you came across, a random video, a comment, a meme someone shared. No obvious source. For example, I've seen videos on TikTok claiming that Putin saved children from the Epstein files. There's just one problem with that, which is absolutely zero evidence. If you actually trace the claim back, the only real-world fact that people point to is that Russia banned US adoptions. That's it. And even that gets stripped of context because adoptions ban had clear political reasons. But notice how it implements all the four core principles. It's emotional, minors, trafficking, moral panic. It creates an enemy, a corrupt Western elite. It spreads socially. People repeat it in the comments like it's a common knowledge. And it has no clear origin, just fragments floating around the internet. By the time you start questioning where it came from, the narrative already feels like a known fact. Every country uses messaging and every government spins narratives, but it doesn't mean that every country's propaganda is the same. Russian propaganda has a very recognizable signature. It prioritizes confusion over persuasion. Russian informational warfare often tries to overwhelm you. Instead of one clear narrative, you get dozens. You get contradictions, half-truth, and multiple versions of events. This approach has been described as fire hose of falsehood. High volume, fast, repetitive messaging with little concern for consistency or truth. The objective is exhaustion, because when people feel like the truth is impossible to find, they stop looking for it. Another key difference is targeting fault lines that already exist. Instead of inventing new problems, Russian disinformation often amplifies political polarization, cultural conflicts, and distrust in institutions that are already there. This doesn't only push pro-Russian narratives, but also erodes trust and cohesion within societies. It's less about making Russia look good and more about making everyone else look broken. It operates as a long-term system. Russian disinformation has roots going back to Soviet active measures, covert political warfare designed to weaken adversaries from the inside. Modern tools changed: social media, bots, influencers, but philosophy stayed the same. Influence the information environment so the reality itself becomes unstable. It blends truth, lies, and noise. One of the most important things to understand, it's rarely 100% fake. Often there is a small piece of truth surrounded by distortion, omission, or emotional framing. You can clearly see it in the whole Epstein versus Putin narrative, where one real fact, the US adoption ban, got twisted into a completely different story. Because pure lies are very easy to debunk, but distorted truth is much harder. Here is how it works in practice. Let's say a war crime happens. Within hours, you won't see one explanation, you will see five. One post claims it was staged, another says it was done by the West. Another says nobody really knows. Another says both sides are equally guilty. And there will definitely be one more that will insist the media is hiding the real truth. Once everything feels equally unreliable, people disengage, and that's exactly what Russia wants, because disengaged audiences are easy to manipulate. What makes this system so effective isn't just scale, but how perfectly it aligns with human psychology and the structure of the modern internet. Propaganda today rarely arrives as a single message and instead moves through layers. From state media to quasi-independent outlets to influencers, clips, and eventually to memes that compress complex geopolitical narratives into something self-evident and obvious. So by the time it reaches most people, it no longer looks like propaganda at all, but like common sense. This works well not because audiences are naive, but because it exploits universal instincts like fear, anger, and tribal belonging, while algorithms amplify whatever provokes the strongest emotional reactions, allowing the most contagious version of a story, not the most accurate one, to travel the furthest. In places like the United States, where conspiracy cultures and institutional distrust already exist, these narratives don't need to create belief from scratch, and instead merge into existing frameworks that reinterpret foreign propaganda as local truth, which is why modern propaganda spreads less like an argument and more like a contagion. So how do you protect yourself without becoming paranoid or distrusting everything you see? The first rule is surprisingly simple: slow down. A lot of manipulation relies on speed, emotional reactions, instant shares, outrage before reflection. So one of the most powerful defenses is just pausing and asking basic questions before engaging with a piece of content. Who made this? Why was it made? And what might they want me to feel? Second, investigate the source, not just the claim. Instead of debating a viral post on its own terms, step sideways and look at where it came from: the author, the outlet, the funding, the track record. Because credibility is often easier to evaluate than individual facts. A reliable habit here is what researchers call lateral reading, opening new tabs and seeing how other credible sources describe the same topic. If a huge claim exists in isolation, that's already a signal. Third, understand context. A lot of misleading content isn't completely fake. It's real information stripped of background, timing, or scale, which is why asking what's missing can be more important than asking is this true? Fourth, be aware of emotional manipulation. Propaganda is designed to trigger reactions: fear, urgency, outrage, because emotional content spreads faster and discourages reflection. If something feels engineered to make you angry immediately, that's usually a reason to slow down, not lean in. Fifth, break out of echo chambers. Algorithms tend to show us information that reinforces what we already believe, creating environments where the same narratives repeat until they feel self-evident. Actively checking perspectives outside your feed isn't weakness, it's intellectual hygiene. And finally, get comfortable with uncertainty. Media literacy doesn't mean instantly knowing the truth. It means tolerating not knowing yet. Resisting the pressure to form an opinion before you have enough information is one of the most underrated forms of resilience. To sum it all up, I want to cite Ukrainian writer Lina Kostenko, who once wrote referring to the Iron Curtain times: "Information used to be our prey, now we are the prey of information. So let's not be the prey, let's stay curious, anchored in reality, and pause before reacting." This video is very special for me because it's not only my first long-form video, but also my first video on YouTube. If you found this useful, I'd really love to hear what you think, whether you agree, disagree, or have your own experiences with propaganda or misinformation online. Thanks for watching, and praise the algorithm for bringing you here.